it's very astute. I mean, to say that it's a green geopolitical war, yes. It comes down to why, right? Why Canada? Why target Canada and its minerals and hydrocarbons? And I think one of the interesting aspects is the United States, because when Senator Manchin came up a couple of weeks ago and said we need to have a North American sort of arrangement where we can be a North American bloc and be self-sufficient and help the world and be the sort of swing producer kind of thing, that is kind of what Stephen Harper had hoped for. And the environmentalists shot it down. And I think part of it is, my theory, people might disagree with me, is the point is to cut off the possibility of using that for the United States, that the ultimate goal is to weaken the United States. And if you look at the policies and how they were very driven to do the Green New Deal, and what Biden is doing, and how much of it makes no sense from a security perspective. And normally the United States is very motivated by energy security. Canada, not so much. And so when this is happening, and the answer is, OPEC, please produce more, because we're going to keep ours in the ground, was very, very strange. And so I think it does go back to this geopolitical green war, but we have to ask why it's happening. They might know it, but they're kind of led to believe that it doesn't matter, that the amounts that Canada puts onto the world market don't matter, which is why when Europe was saying, well, we need more oil and gas, and the answer from the Trudeau government is, we'd like to help you, but it won't do any good anyway, which to me was a fundamental misunderstanding of how oil markets work. If Canada contributes oil and it helps the United States, then the United States doesn't have to use other stuff that they can then export, or if ours goes to South America, well, then South America doesn't have to import from somewhere else, and that other oil is available to the rest of the world. So to say, well, it's not going to do any good anyway, but it would. it would help lower the prices and enable Europe to get oil and gas from somewhere else. I think that had a significant effect. He's been talking about that to investors for many years, that if they don't get on the climate change bandwagon, that there's going to be stranded assets and they're going to suffer. And, you know, he was the Bank of England governor, and he was chair of the G30, and was the head of the Bank of Canada, and he was on it was a banking group that would help do these regulations and whatnot after the 2008 financial crisis. And he would talk to whoever would listen, that this was what was going to happen. And he said, the thing is, you have to keep talking, because eventually people will have to take into account what you're saying. And that a lot of pressure was brought to bear to the financial institutions to, divest. Well, they say divest now while you still can, and then reinvest in renewables or reinvest in whatever the new technology they're putting out there. And I think there was a bit of a hope that the state oil companies would pick up the difference, pick up the slack, so to speak, which would be to the benefit of countries like Saudi Arabia or Venezuela, or even China that does a lot of operations with their state oil companies. So if you remove the private companies from the market and from contributing more supply to the world market, then that supply will need to be made up from somewhere else. And I think the state oil companies would be the ones to do it. Although BlackRock is investing quite a lot in Saudi Arabia and in pipelines and various other things. So, they divest from Western companies, but then continue to invest in developing, so-called developing countries. And Mark Carney's Brookfield, where he's a VP, is one of them. They bought the pipeline, one of the pipelines in Alberta, and then they also bought a pipeline somewhere in the developing world. So divest from Western companies, but then do something else. First, I think that the Allen inquiry was a great service to Albertans to demonstrate what kind of money gets funneled into these groups that claim to be grassroots and what they're doing with it. I mean, in the 600 some pages of the report, it in detail documented where the money was coming from, to as well as they could, because it was difficult, where it was going, and what was being accomplished with it. And there are many examples of how the environmental groups were using this to stop development, to just stop it. And Albertans needed to know that. And so I'm really grateful that the inquiry happened and that information is there. But it's up to Albertans, to some extent, to look at that information and to try to make some sense out of it. And I know Friends of Science has been really good in demonstrating, or at least trying to help explain what's been going on. With respect to the Great Reset, you just need one premier to stand up against any of this stuff. So I think if Albertans had a strong leader who would come out and stand up and say, you know, this isn't right, and I'm going to do my best to make sure it doesn't happen, maybe that would help. But I think Albertans need to also know that it's going on. I think there's a little more awareness in some circles about what the Great Reset is about and whatnot, and maybe people could tune into my podcast and hear discussions about this, conversations about it, and just to increase their own information of and think of for themselves what they think would work. I started the podcast last year just trying to have longer conversations about these issues, because there's people out there who have been researching, and very credible and very good research on all of these different issues, on net zero, on climate change, on the Great Reset. I've had, I think, 2 conversations about that, about the role of China and the environment, about the digital ID, ESG scores, and so on. So there's been a wide range of conversations about lots of these different issues that we find our country is being confronted with, and that we need to understand them so we can decide whether this is something we want or if it's something we don't want, and to do something about it. The podcast is called The Nemeth Report, and it's available on Apple Podcasts. If you just type in The Nemeth Report, it shows up. It's also on Spotify, Anchor FM. They're also streamed on YouTube and Rumble, and there's a Facebook page. So I think it's also available on Amazon. So there's quite a few different podcast places, and that, I think Apple is probably the #1 place to find it, or Spotify, but also YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook. Hopefully not too long from now, but yes, I'm working on it.